Well, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Harrison, and this is the 15th EMEA AgTech Exchange, and we're very excited to have Premise here with us to present. Sarah, could you go to the next slide for me? This is just the introductions. For those of you who are joining for the first time or listening for the first time, my name is Casey Harrison. I'm the Director of Impact and Learning at Nuru International. But I also act as the AgTech Working Group lead for EMEA, as Nuru is a member of EMEA globally. We're also going to have Mohammed and Sarah here, and they'll introduce themselves in just a moment as we transition to the Premise slides. But this contact information will be available to everyone after the completion of the webinar. So next slide. Just to set the context as we usually do, this is part of a webinar series we've been running since about 2020, early 2020 at EMEA as part of the AgTech Working Group. And so the working group really in 2022 has two priorities. One is to continue these webinars in this series, and we should have at least one more in 2022 as we are going now. We also have another activity that's ongoing, which is we are designing and researching a roadmap for farmer organizations that helps them identify ag tech that's appropriate for where they are in their business development journey. So that's the other activity we have ongoing at this time. One note for those who are joining, traditionally for EMEA members only, we have a working group meeting after these webinars. Today we do not. We're going to be setting that up for November. We're currently making progress on that second priority, but we don't have major updates today, so we're going to move that to November. Next slide, please. And with that, that's enough from me. I'm going to pass it over to Sarah and Mo, and really excited about this 15th AgTech Exchange with Premise. So Sarah, oh, one last thing, sorry, I forgot, housekeeping things. If you're not presenting, try to go off video like I will in just a moment. Remain on mute if possible throughout the webinar and ask your questions in the chat. And we'll have a focused discussion and Q&A at the end to allow everyone to get a chance to ask as many questions as they'd like. So with that, I'll pass it over to Premise.
Awesome. Thank you very much. There's a weird sound. Is that okay, my sound now? Yeah, okay.
Yes, you're good now.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Casey. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Casey said, I'm Sarah. I am joined by Mo in a weird way. He's in this physical location, but a different room. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here today to talk to you all about the company I work for, which is called Premise. Premise is a technology platform which enables partners such as GIZ or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation within the international development sector and the ag sector to crowdsource the data that they need from a network of over 5 million people across the world, particularly from hard to reach places in Africa, Asia and Latin America. I'll go into a bit more detail about Premise, our capabilities, what I think we can offer to the people who are kindly joining us today. And then I'm going to hand over to Mo, who's a lot more expert in the use of our platform, and he's going to give you a demonstration of Premise and give you a good idea of what we can offer. To start with, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about me. This is my third month of Premise. Before I was at Premise, about 5 years ago, I worked for WeFarm, which is potentially a social enterprise people have heard of. WeFarm was a platform which was connecting farmers with each other by SMS so they could share information with each other. I worked at WeFarm for about 3 years. We went from 1,000 users to 2 million in the time I was there. And although we were all about connecting farmers and getting farmers to share data, we needed a ton of contextual data in order to build that platform, and had various different challenges getting hold of that data, various different successes. After WeFarm, I went on to work for Producers Direct, which is a charity which supports smallholder farmers. And part of my role was developing a concept we called Croppy, which was another technology platform which was looking at the way that you could empower farmers to share their data with the platform and in order to get actionable insights about their farms back to their phone. And again, it's about the project was about sharing data, but we needed again an expanse of additional data to enable us to develop that. And the reason I'm saying this is I firsthand know how difficult it is to get that data, but also how valuable it is. I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about the kinds of data we found useful in the development of those tools. And I'd love to hear from all of you later on about the kind of data that I've missed. But in general, kind of the first set of data that we were constantly seeking to have is on-farm data. So GPS locations, what are farmers growing, the specific kind of details about that kind of geographic location. And then we were looking to have data about reach. So how do we get to those rural people, and like, how do you overcome things like low digital literacy? How do you reach women? How do you reach farmers from older generations? And then we were trying to understand the needs and the barriers to accessing technology, and we were obviously everyone will know this. There's multiple different needs and barriers. You're not ever going to identify just one that a farmer is encountering. There's going to be multiple cross-cutting needs and barriers that you're trying to overcome in order to provide access to excellent technology for that population. And then finally, you obviously need to know about adoption. So once you've got your technology out there, like, are people able to use it? Is it useful? Are they sharing it with other people? Are they actioning the insights they're getting, for example? And as I mentioned, we Farm and Producers Direct, we encountered all sorts of challenges in terms of getting hold of that data, and having spoken to other organisations in the field, I know that that is also felt across the sector as well. So very simply, the first challenge is related to the cost and the time it takes to collect the data you need. We all know that is a significant resource investment that lots of us are investing our time and money into. The second is the kind of, I call it, it's the pull between complexity versus regularity. So some of the data we need to collect is very complex, very in-depth, but at the same time, it's very, very useful to have that data on a regular basis. And again, that sort of adds to the challenge of getting your hands on that data. Once you have access to that data, you need to be able to analyze and visualize it. And in many cases, that takes a very specific skill set that not all organizations have in-house. And then finally, we're obviously talking about collecting data in very challenging places. So very, very rural locations with low smartphone ownership. Even more so challenging locations due to conflict, insecurity, and other concerns, which make it even harder to get hold of that data. So we know that there's a significant need for data. We know that there are many challenges associated with finding that data. And that is where Premise comes in. Premise was born about 10 years ago to leverage the fact that millions and billions of people across the world are now own a smartphone. And so Premise is enabling our partners to collect the data they need. And essentially that works with leveraging two types of users for Premise. So first of all, we have what we would call Premise contributors. Our contributors are people who have downloaded the Premise app onto their phone, and they can start using our app to collect data and get paid to collect data. The second type of user are our partners. So that's people within the AgTech sector, as we have joining us here today. Or we also work with commercial customers, and we work with the public sector, so governments. And so those that type of user is using Premise to get hold of the data they need. So what would happen is they would design a data collection task in partnership with a member of the team here at Premise. That will be launched out into our marketplace, and you would choose exactly who you would like to conduct that data collection, whether or not that's women, whether or not that's people in a specific location. And then in near real time, the partner is then able to see that data straight back into the Premise platform. I say near real time because a lot of data quality checks take place before that data is visible by our partners. And I will go into a bit more detail about that in a minute. So what kind of data can we collect? What kind of data can you collect using premise? There are 4 types of data. The first is very simple. We can simply send surveys to our contributors, which they complete based on their own thoughts, attitudes, beliefs. A second type of data is we can ask our contributors to act as enumerators within their communities. So they can go out into their community and ask community members a set of questions. And that's particularly relevant, obviously, when not everybody in the community has a smartphone. The third type of data, we can ask a contributor to go into their community and find something. That can be a place, a product, a service, and then collect data based on that service, based on what they found. That can be including taking photo, taking videos, and also answering questions. And finally, we can ask our contributors to go to a specific GPS location. So please go to this specific farm at this specific GPS location and conduct this data collection. So who are the people who are collecting your data, the people that we call our contributors? So anybody across the whole world can be a premise contributor. The idea behind premise is that we're kind of democratizing access to data collection. That said, that doesn't mean that just anybody will be collecting your data. We are very careful about who we select to collect data for different types of tasks. So, for example, if it's a relatively simple task, like just simply answering a few questions on a survey, that would be available to many of our contributors. But if we're talking about a much more complicated task, so sending somebody into a community where there might be certain sensitivities, that would only be available to what we would call our gold star contributors. So those are contributors who have a very good history with premise. We know they have collected very good quality data for an extended period of time. So we'd be very careful about that. Another thing that we are very, very careful about is the quality of the data that is being provided to the partners that we work with. Of course, that's one of the most important things for you, we know. There are tons and tons of different data quality checks that we do on the data. I won't go into all of those now because we don't have time. And a lot of those are dependent on the type of data. So I was just going to give you an example of the quality checks we do on a simple survey. So that on a simple survey, every single survey that is visible by the partner would go through these checks. So there would be conditional logic within the survey, perhaps even specific questions, checking the person is paying attention. Any surveys where the median time spent to answer the question is under 2.5 seconds would be rejected. We reject surveys where the same button, the same answer has been submitted multiple times. So we would call that like button bashing. That would be rejected. And finally, if a survey is completed with a very close GPS location within an hour, a second survey is completed within that hour, that would be rejected as well. But if anybody's interested in learning more about the data quality controls, I'm very happy to talk to you about that after the webinar. So finally, before I hand over to Mo, so this sounds all great. How do I use Premise? So Premise is our base product is a software as a service subscription. We have 7 different kind of subscription plan levels, and they provide you with access to different amounts of data, essentially. And what the subscription plan will give you is a certain number of credits that you can then use as a currency to spend on the platform. And credits are worth different amounts depending on the complexity of data you're trying to collect. So with a simple survey, that is 1 credit. If we're talking about an enumerator-led interview going out into the people going into the community, that would be 4 credits. And so yeah, we would need to be able to give you an idea of the cost of Premise. It ranges very much in terms of the type, complexity, and amount of data you're going to need. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Mo now. He's going to show you a lot of visualizations from the platform and walk you through a couple of use cases about how other people in the sector have used Premise. And then I'm looking forward to your questions and having a lively discussion with you after that. So over to you, Mo.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm just going to start sharing my screen now. Okay, well, I hope everyone can comfortably see my screen and this very colorful map visualization. So before I jump in, my name is Mo, and I am a solutions consultant at Premise. I'm based in the London office. I act as a subject matter expert for the Premise platform. And today I'll be running through an in-depth demonstration of the Premise platform, showing you a number of our use cases and how our customers today in the IDEV space are using the Premise platform to collect data around the world. So first things first, based upon this map and what we are seeing here, Premise is able to collect data from over 138 different countries around the world. And there are a number of ways that we can visually demonstrate that data that has been crowdsourced from our contributors across the globe. This is one of our platforms where we are able to visually demonstrate both, we are able to demonstrate geospatial data. So that is both observational plus sentiment-based data collection. If we, for example, were to zoom in on any specific regions around the world, such as Eastern Europe, you will notice how, when it loads, a lot of these high-level density dots, these points of interest, will become a lot more dense. We are able to collect data from not only the most populous regions of the world, the major cities, but also going to more semi-urban and rural areas. We can gather data from these remote areas quite simply using our contributors who have smartphones. So if they have ability to connect to the internet, they can submit data, they can receive tasks on our behalf, and then earn money for their efforts. If I dive into a specific use case, and this is focused in Afghanistan, and a previous task that we have conducted and carried out, we worked with an NGO who were interested in providing humanitarian aid and monitoring the food security situation in Afghanistan following the US withdrawal at the end of 2021. What they were basically looking to do, by monitoring the food security situation, was inform themselves on what the drivers are around the significant growth of crops, and if there were any issues in the initial supply chain in gathering food and distributing food around the country to those that were most in need. So what we can do is we can zoom in on any of these particular locations. And what we have asked our contributors to do in these instances is not only take pictures of the fields in which they may operate within, but also provide sentiment on that particular location. And sentiment can be anything around their concerns around security, but sentiment around the quality of their yields. How do they think the following year will be for their production on certain crops? For example, do you own or have access to this field? And what I'll do is I'll just zoom into this particular location and adjust the satellite view on that. But our contributor in this case owns this particular field. They have identified that there is crop damage. And they have also identified, compared to last year, that the conditions of their pasture is significantly worse. So again, we are able to identify at a very hyperlocal level in some very rural areas by just accessing a smartphone that our contributor has and understanding at the farm level what is ongoing. And again, those image observations are very clear. Now, how do we ultimately verify the quality of these submissions, and how do we actually verify that this is a submission that is in fact returned from this particular location? Well, starting at the automatic quality control level, we are able to target specific regions as we have that full control and autonomy internally at Premise. So we know exactly where our contributors are submitting data from, because every single input that they provide, we are capturing their geotagged location, so their lat longitude. We are also able to geofence certain areas of where we are looking to maybe collect data from. So that can range from country level to city to sub-city level, or even drawing really small polygons around certain areas where we're only expecting specific contributors to submit their responses from. But moving on to other types of tasks and still focusing on the idea of targeting our contributors in very difficult places to reach around the world, I am just going to hide a few of my panels to make this clearer. What we have done in Senegal, Ivory Coast, Ghana, but not limited to these countries, is to be able to profile our contributors to understand what their ages are, the gender, more importantly, what is their level, what is the nature of their work. We've been working with a number of our customers today and interested partners who want to understand what is the agricultural profile of our network, but more so being able to target those that are working as part of this industry. So how does that look like on a visualization side? Well, we are targeting all of our contributors within these countries. We're asking them a number of questions around what is their level of employment, but most importantly, what industry or sector is your primary job? Out of this sample, 224 identified that they work in the agricultural industry. And then from there, we can start to dissect the level and the type of work that they operate within in the agricultural space. So 81% of this small sample identifying that they work in crop production, going down to crop and livestock production as the smallest category. But then from then on, we have an ability to target those contributors even further, to understand more around the types of crops that they work with. Again, majority of our respondents saying fruits. But then those who, again, who are maybe operating as part-time or seasonal work, asking them further questions around the types of work that they are involved with. So this is just some of the capabilities and showing you the potential, quite simply, of our reach to gather data from these very remote and rural locations across not only in Afghanistan, but also into sub-Saharan Africa and even other locations around the world. Jumping on to our use cases now in more detail and exactly how some of our customers today are using the platform. So USAID Mali wanted to test the premise platform for activity monitoring, specifically for goat and sheep expos, as they wanted to understand how much the vendors sold their goats and sheep for. So a very difficult data collection exercise, but again, using our contributors out in the field, out in these remote and rural areas, we were able to ask our most highly trained and highly reviewed contributors to go to these expos and conduct data collection exercises for us. Quite simply, they were interviewing any goat or sheep herder at these expos and asking them a number of questions around how many goats and sheep they sold, as well as the total earnings. So we had far more quality control measures than previously, as what we were actually able to do was use video observations to actually verify the interviews happened. But just to give you an example of what the tasks actually looked like for the contributor, USAID gave us the descriptions, they gave us the data requirements. We then were able to train our contributors prior to data collection, prior to going to these expos on what we expected of them. So before going to, as I said, before going to the specific expo, we made them, we trained them within the Premise app to understand how to conduct themselves whilst they were at the expo, the types of questions that they must ask of the contributor, ask of those sheep and goat herders, but also how to record the data, specifically as we were requesting video observations as well. So this is just an example of the types of questions that we actually asked of our contributors to then ask of the goat and sheep herders. Going on to some of those in-depth insights and what it looks like in a lot more detail, these are some of the observations we were able to gather from our contributors. And this was all achieved within a single day. So going into details, we're asking them to not only take image observations, but also videos, and that should be able to load. And as that loads, I will also scroll down for further of those video and image observations. You can clearly see that our contributors are making their way through these expos, conducting these interviews, and ultimately verifying that this did in fact take place. There are additional ways in which we can demonstrate the data and we can visualize that. We are able to build advanced dashboards and break down those images, the sentiment-based observations, into data that can be extracted and used for additional purposes, to be able to display internally to those internal stakeholders, but to also fuel your decisions as you go forward. So in these three regions across Mali, these specific locations, and for example, in Bugoni, we conducted 26 interviews. We're able to calculate the overall average sheep earnings of all the herders, the heads of the sheep, so the average price per sheep. But more importantly, we're able to demonstrate that these in fact did happen, that they did take place, and they were in fact verified. We can also scroll to these interviews, and what I can do is just shortly play that. And what we've asked here is for the vendor to state their name and confirm that they were in fact interviewed. And in order for any of these submissions to be accepted on our side, we had to verify that the video did in fact take place and the herder was in fact confirming their name. Okay, moving on to another example of data collection, this time within Senegal, working with the Food Enterprise Solutions team. This is a different and a very interesting use case because we have not targeted our most advanced contributors to conduct this task. We have asked our contributors in Dakar and Mbour on behalf of this project to go to seafood points of sales and open markets to conduct assessments on the conditions of these seafood markets, the water containment, how clean these particular sites are. And what Food Enterprise Solutions were really interested in doing was just identifying what the main food safety challenges were in Senegal in regards to fresh and dried seafood. So our contributors were asked to go to these establishments, go to these markets, and assess the conditions at these sites. So the tasks, as I mentioned, it included water and sanitation, assessing how clean these sites were, taking pictures of how the seafood was displayed at these particular locations, and also providing their sentiment around that as well. So if I was to zoom in on this location here and pick on any of these submissions, we're asking contributors to identify that they are in fact at these sites and locations, taking a picture of the conditions of the market. Again, very hyperlocal data collection, but again, just using any contributor who is out there in the field at that particular time or within the region, they can log into the Premise app and they can start collecting data and again, earning on behalf of Premise. Okay, I will take a pause there and I will hand back to Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray. Sorry, just putting my screen back on. I was just attempting to answer Oscar's question, but I might. Casey, are you happy for me to lead this, or would you like to kind of also be involved in the discussion?
No, it can work either way. I mean, the way we generally do it is at this stage, we open it up for questions from anyone. I obviously have a few myself that can help sort of jumpstart the conversation, but at this stage, if anyone has any specific questions, it looks like we had a few questions come in through the chat that you already answered, but if you wanted to ask, offer any more context to the audience, now's the time to do that, so.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you, Casey. So I answered Oscar Barufa. You asked a question about the formats the data is available in, and do we have API access? I answered it in the chat. But yeah, if you want any more information than that, feel free to post another question. And then I think there's another question. What is the approximate range of cost we would need to budget for the examples of the market vendor and the seafood POS examples? That's a very good question. So the support the packages that are available with Premise, like they start at $43,000. That's the cost of the lowest package, and then they go up from there. So that would be 5,000 credits. So with the example of the seafood POS examples, you could collect about 2,500 of those data sets using that package. If you were to conduct a survey, wanting to just a simple survey, you could conduct 5,000 surveys with that package. I hope that gives you an idea of the kind of the cost of the platform.
Yeah, that's nice. So sorry, just on that. So you saying, yeah, so you buy a bunch of credits up front and then you use them for various tasks throughout, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
correct.
is there, do you buy, I'm assuming there's, yeah, do you get lower rates the larger chunks of credits you buy?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the larger chunk of credits you buy, the lower the cost per survey or cost per go to this place and find this becomes. Yeah, definitely. And I can share that with you. I've got a kind of slide which breaks that down, if that would be useful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so now we have another question. How many on average contributors and numerators do you have per country where you're active? That is a very super great question, and that is it varies across the world. So for example, in Nigeria, I think we have about 21,000 contributors at the moment. It's a very, very strong market for us. If the way that Premise works is obviously a supply and demand. So if we have a number of clients wanting data in one country, then we grow the network of contributors in that country. So we have strong countries, and we have countries which we have fewer contributors in. If there are, what I could do after this call is I could share a bit more detail about the countries where we have significant numbers of contributors, where we can do kind of nationally representative surveying, and some of the other countries where we have fewer numbers of contributors, but that means that we can do more of the kind of go out into the community, collect tasks, or enumerator-led tasks. But also you have my contact details. If there are specific countries that you would like to know about, then please do let me know. And for example, if I was going to think about East Africa, we have great networks in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania, and Ethiopia. I don't know off the top of my head Ethiopia. Mo, are you aware of Ethiopia? I haven't got that number in my head. Maybe we can come back to that. How do you see your services being used on a large scale beyond USAID projects? Wow, that is a great question. Okay, so the way that I think that Premise adds an enormous amount of value is the fact that you so there's lots of different ways, but so first of all, it's very quick and easy to launch a survey or a task using Premise. So there's a lot of scope to be collecting data quickly on a regular basis. So I feel like that's a really great use case, particularly within the ag kind of world, because you're often like wanting to have like quick snapshots. You want a planting date, you want whether or not the person's harvested at a certain time. So kind of that regular data, being able to collect that really, really quickly. Another really good way of using Premise is kind of mixed methodology of combining surveys with enumerator-led interviews to get kind of a mixed overview of a particular topic. So you can go at depth into that topic, and you can get a quantitative breadth about that topic. There's tons of others. I mean, I don't know, Mo, and I'm also very pleased to have Sophia on the call as well, who's also a member of Premise.
Sarah, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Kind of like it's related to the question that Mark was asking in the chat, and also something that came to mind when I received because I'm registered as part of your newsletter for Premise as well in my email, and so recently you have this ability to do kind of pulse, like take a pulse of the population in a place where that event may have taken place. So Burkina Faso recently went through the latest coup, which is in the news. One of the things we received was the rapid survey that you conducted. Maybe you could talk about some specific examples like that, for example, of how Premise can be able to gather intelligence rapidly and when there's an event that takes place. For example, we've been dealing with a food crisis around the world, but also this has very contextual and specific impacts in certain places. So maybe we could talk about those types of specific reports that can be generated using the Premise the Premise system, but also and then maybe get into that more detailed enumerator-led targeted survey that might be for an evaluation purpose. And then we can kind of differentiate between those two different deliverables using the Premise service. If that would be great for, I think, the audience just to hear both of those cases side by side from your experience as a team.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, Mo, I think Mo wants to say something.
I can take an example of where we have monitored a situation, a rising conflict and I'm going to touch upon Peru, which happened earlier this year. So Peru was affected, as many countries across the world, by the ongoing war in Ukraine. Supply chain impacts were felt in Peru. There were significant increases in the cost of living and food, for example. And what we did prior to protests being launched across the country, we were releasing sentiment-based tasks to understand what was the communities feeling across the country as to the rise in the cost of living. How did they feel towards the government, and would there be any inclinations from the community to perhaps protest? This then led to, a month later, protests breaking out across the country. We then asked our contributors to go out to these sites, to the main plazas of the main cities in Peru, and record observations of exactly what was happening. So we have an ability to monitor sentiment prior to particular conflicts or a situation that may be arising, and then we have an ability to then send our contributors out to these locations to gather observations around it, physical observations, but then combined with sentiment around that as well. So I hope that answers that particular question on that.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
other thing I
definitely.
would also add is, so there's another example recently where we have conducted a nationally representative survey in Nigeria prior to the election that's due to happen there. And Casey, you may well have received this in your blog email as well. Sorry. So knowing this an event is about to happen, we can do a fast survey about that event. So we did this in Kenya, for example, recently when the elections were happening. So we did polling before and after, so that you can have that pulse check surrounding an event that's happening. And the other kind of benefit of Premise is it's not just the survey. You can obviously then have people share photos and testimonials and videos of an event that's happened, which we did recently in South Africa. I don't remember the month, but it was a hurricane, or there was a natural disaster in South Africa, and like just after we were having contributors reporting the damage and the impact that had on their communities. So it's a great use case for Premise, and I think that's because it's just very quick and easy to launch a task, so we can be very reactive to somebody's needs. And the fact that you have the subscription for 12 months means that, again, that means you have the kind of option of data kind of at your fingertips. So if you are running a project and you do want to suddenly collect a data set surrounding a particular event, you just get in touch with your account manager at Premise, Sophia, who has joined us is one of them, and they can help you get that data. Casey, you were also talking about enumerator-led.
Yeah, and then that pivot to that more detailed and structured survey, like the example that Mo gave, but sort of maybe talking less about how does the kind of the process, Mo, you mentioned sort of the questions can be delivered to you and you can generate the survey, but also in terms of 2 points in that sort of development timeline. One, the co-creation process of getting the questions right, because as anyone who's done a lot of survey creation knows, that's very important, especially for the understanding of the respondent. And then the second, which is where some of the chat questions are coming from, so we can pivot to that next, is sort of how you coach the enumerators or the contributors, especially for that more focused survey, and how you use the system to support that.
Yeah, so I can take the questions around process, how we typically engage with customers. When we start working with customers, we ultimately define their requirements. The typical questions are who, what, where, and how much data are you looking to collect and capture? It's very important for us to understand at the beginning of the project what we're ultimately dealing with. Once we have that criteria from our customers, we'll then start to engage with our contributor base in the mobile app. We would all want to understand, based upon our discussion with the customer, the locations they're trying to target. Perhaps there may be additional recruitment that may be required to go out and gather the data in some of these more adverse locations that might be extremely rural and just hard to get to. The USAID Mali example that I gave, we did have contributors that were nearby. Some of them did have to travel. And again, all of this was noted well in advance as we were in direct conversations with these contributors. But Once we start releasing the task into the marketplace, the submissions will start coming through as a contributor has completed a specific task that then will go through our quality control methods that I touched upon earlier. What I haven't quite mentioned is that, for example, where we're only dealing with sentiment-based submissions, we're not only checking where their location is, and in fact, are they in the right location and not using any VPN or geo-spoofing tools, but we're checking that they are attentive, that they are answering each question appropriately, that they're not button smashing their way through the task. We have a number of algorithms running in the background to ultimately check the average time at which a contributor is responding to. But then as the data is coming in, as it's being quality controlled, we're then visualizing all the data in near to real time platforms. We're building advanced dashboards depending on our customers' reporting methods and mechanisms as well. To go back to the question on how do we identify and train contributors for projects, have timelines and specific geographic sites. So it comes back down to, the start of any project when we are ultimately clarifying the who, what, where, when, and how much data. Obviously, we have some demanding customers from the public sector and a number of customers who are dealing with humanitarian aid efforts, and they are looking for near to real-time data. They want to go into some of these disaster locations and collect data to fuel their decisions as they move forward to provide that instant relief and aid efforts there. So what we'll do is we'll try to assess our existing network in some of these locations. We'll try to assess the viability of actually sending contributors out to these specific locations. Is it safe to do so? How able are contributors in actually being able to conduct a task? And then coming to the question of training. And again, in that previous example, what we'll do is we'll send out tasks into the marketplace that are targeting some of our most advanced contributors. We'll ask them, are you able to go out on this specific date to collect data for us to this specific site? If so, they'll be following additional questions. Are you able to take videos in this manner? And what we might do is ask them to conduct tests, test tasks within the actual premise app. So take a video of your surrounding, take a video of a clear object, take some images, and again, additional ways of really just testing that they are in fact able to do that. And so I hope that answers that question.
That's all. Thanks, Mo. Thank you for answering that. And Anne Gordon has asked a question. She's asked, she'd be interested in info on two aspects. One is how much of your data or contributors gets rejected by your quality checks. And the second question, do you get much feedback from your users about what works and what doesn't? So I'll start with the second question, and then Mo, you might know specific stats on the first one, so I might pass over to you on that. So on the first one, absolutely, we definitely get. I think that's an added benefit of being able to work with an account manager at Premise is they have designed very many similar the tasks in the past, like maybe not exactly the same, but they have a lot of experience of how to make the platform work for our partners. And yeah, part of that is getting feedback from our contributors. They can feedback at any time when they're using the app. So yeah, that's definitely something that we can do. And I'll hand over to Mo to answer the question about the amount of data that's rejected.
Yeah, a great question. We are always battling with our contributors who are trying to attempt fraudulent submissions, to try to obviously beat the system. But just over the last few years, of course, we have learned and we've been able to prevent this from happening. We are constantly developing new ways of ensuring that the data is of a high quality, and that is our real differentiator, that we are providing high quality data out there, whether it's sentiment based or is image observation based as well. So how do we vet our contributors? Well, beyond the quality control and the initial outset of even launching a particular task, we have applied a scoring metric system to all of our contributors. And this starts at the point that they download the Premise app. So how long are they taking, for example, to conduct tasks? We are applying tentative checks in majority of our tasks. So are they clearly paying attention to the actual question? Does the logic of their answers actually make sense? As I mentioned earlier, are they button smashing their way through the task? And again, are they doing this repeatedly? Is there any geolocation spoofing thing being conducted on their app? Are they creating multiple accounts? So we're creating a scoring system, basically. And obviously, if you keep breaching our policy and our rules that you signed at the point you download the Premise app, then you may be blacklisted from the particular. Then you may be blacklisted completely from the Premise app. And then even beyond that, as I touched upon some of those quality control measures, we do receive rejected submissions. Sometimes a contributor may not have read a question clearly to respond in a certain manner that we have requested. But what we are now applying, whilst the contributor is actually conducting that task, is direct feedback. So, for example, if the question is, give us your opinions in more detail on a certain topic, we would apply a minimum character limit. So to prevent them from just typing a few letters. So they would not be able to move forward. They may not be able to move back until they have fulfilled that particular question. And again, if they have answered a question inconsistently to some of the previous questions that they have asked, again, they would not be able to perhaps move forward. We would warn them that their logic, again, is inconsistent. So again, additional measures of just ensuring that we are then receiving quality data. So that may not even need to be a rejected submission. We're training them as they are completing that particular task.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick, Sarah? Probably you can answer it or Mo can answer it. You talk about how you're ensuring quality. Is there, from the contributor standpoint, is there an incentive to be a 5-star sort of contributor, and how does that work from the perspective of the contributor?
There certainly is. There are many projects, data collection initiatives that we have enrolled around the world that require a contributor to be appropriately trained, to be able to collect the data in a responsible manner, to listen clearly to the instructions. For example, the Mali task, they may have needed to travel to that specific site and location, and they would have, of course, have had to perform the task to our clear set of instructions and guidelines. But then from there, they would also be rewarded appropriately for their time. So we do have many cases and examples across the world, whether it's in the cities, the more semi-urban, even rural areas, that contributors are earning good money from their data collection tasks. We do have counts of many of these of our record holders, I guess, within the last month. Sarah, I think you have some of those numbers at hand, perhaps, in some of our top leaders in terms of earnings. Maybe you can comment on as well.
Yeah. So also, just to summarize what Mo was saying, is basically that when you reach the gold star level of a contributor, you then have access to the tasks that are paid better. So that as you're kind of progressing through and doing more and more complex tasks and demonstrating your skill in collecting that data, you then have access to better paying tasks. And so one of the stats I know is our highest paid female contributor actually managed to earn $72,000 in a year. She was doing tons and tons of enumerator-led interviews. Basically, she was a very high quality contributor, and she was doing a lot of that work. Wait a minute, it wasn't a year, that's an all-time earnings, $72,000. One of our highest paid contributors last month, in August, was in Mali, and they earned over $2,000 in that month. So it is definitely a really good livelihoods driver, essentially, for our contributors. So on one side, you're helping partners to get access to the data, but also our contributors, about a quarter of them in a recent survey, we found this was the first time they had access to kind of gig economy work. I think over a quarter of the contributors surveyed, sorry for the background noise, were paid digitally for the first time as a result of using the Premise app. So by using, I think that's something we could leverage a lot more, is like by using Premise, we're having an impact on both sides of the supply and demand. And then I'm just aware we've skipped the GDPR question.
Yeah, actually, Sarah, real quick, I wanna frame that question from Oscar more broadly too, because I think it's beyond just the general data protection regulations for the EU. I think it's I would like to sort of frame that question and just see the last 10 minutes that you guys have is just talk to us a little bit more about how you protect and safeguard personally identifiable information, especially of the respondents. And then the consent question that Oscar alludes to too, again, this probably is built into the training and the coaching of the actual contributors themselves, but I think it's very important to better discuss sort of informed consent of a contributor or of a respondent or a contributor for that matter, and how you ensure that is built in. And then if you can speak specifically to the EU regulations, that's great too for Oscar's response from IDH.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah, I can take much of this. Please feel free to jump in at any point. Quite simply, we are not collecting any personal identifiable information within the Premise app on any task, whether at the point a contributor has downloaded the app and they're submitting some profile information around themselves. We are not internally collecting that data. The data that has been collected at the point the contributor downloads the app, even if it is an email, will be obfuscated internally in our internal cloud database. So where we are housing all the information around our contributors. So not even us, the staff of Premise can see that information. Now, when it comes to tasks, and for example, let's take some of these specific focus tasks that we have worked on, particularly in USAID Mali. All training was done within the Premise app. So again, we are not collecting any PII on our highly trained contributors who have actually gone out to those expos to conduct those tasks. And then that is applied to any other tasks that we will complete. There is an obfuscated user ID that is a generic number that is generated. Now our customers have access to that. Perhaps if a contributor is repeating multiple tasks, may be targeted to answer on a set cadence, but then again, there would be no PII identified or collected that would be shared externally. To detail the questions around EU GDPR requirements and ensuring that our informed consent are adhered to, quite simply, we are GDPR compliant. We are audited and we are tested for that. In terms of, I'm not an expert on EU GDPR compliances in general, but we can arrange for a separate call and we can answer more of those detailed questions if needed. But we have to apply to, and we have to quite simply comply to GDPR agreements.
So one thing I would add is GIZ is one of our partners, and they're collecting data using Premise, and I know obviously GIZ would not be able to be collecting data unless we were very fully GDPR compliant. There's an example of demonstrating that essentially. And Casey, the other question was about safety of the contributors, or would you re-articulate it for me, because I've slightly lost the thread of the other side of the question we were answering.
Well, I think you answered it in full. I think the other part, informed consent elements, it's really at the respondent level. So where the person, especially if it's that survey that's being conducted on that, or that farmer, or the geotag that you're looking at, and you're a farmer in a specific place, just ensuring the privacy and protection of their data that's being collected and aggregated as part of that task, right? So that was sort of the other side of the question. I think generally, I think Mo answered it, but if you guys had anything else you wanted to add there, I think it's always helpful, because this is obviously, data privacy, data protection, individual rights in that space is something that's very important to discuss, and especially for people just to have awareness of as they're coming to you to look for a partnership. Yeah.
No, again, great question to allude to. So I pulled up earlier examples in Afghanistan where we clearly have identified contributors that own that particular farm or that particular land. However, again, there is no PII that is collected on behalf of that particular contributor. So that location may be identified, but then our customers would not be able to directly target or try and in any way communicate through the Premise app to that particular farmer. All they would have, of course, at that particular location is just a geolocation at that particular time. but there's no personal information that is collected on that particular farmer that is shared with premise.
Yeah, and on the informed consent side, Casey, obviously, within the app, the contributor is made aware of is made aware that of what their data is being used for, and obviously that's being kept in a very secure way, and not shared. Where you can identify the personal data, and also they can obviously delete that. So all of their rights essentially our contributors are informed about. It is an area I am aware is there's a lot of debate and discussion about how to do it better. So I mean we are adhering to kind of like the best practice, but I know that it's also a field and an area, particularly when it comes to like kind of rural farmer data, like really making sure that farmers understand the value of the data they're sharing is a massive area of interest for me personally and for us as an organisation. So also always open to have discussions about how we could do it better, and yeah, we very much welcome that. I'm aware we've got 2 minutes left.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that's a natural place to end. I mean, again, on that topic in particular, and I know that you're all open to further follow up and discussion with any EMEA members or any other potential interested parties looking to reach out to Premise and learn more about you. I know we've talked about that. So I think it's a good natural place to sort of pause. There's obviously a lot more to talk about, but we'll just have to find another venue to do that in.
Yeah, absolutely. Would be delighted to talk to anybody about delving into any of these topics more. You have my contact details. You have most contact details. Do get in touch. We'd love to chat.
Yeah, and there will be a survey shared after this webinar that will come out to those who registered formally through the email invitation as well. And so we'll be able to get some feedback to you. And this also is recorded, and so it'll be shared on the EMEA AgTech website or web page, part of the EMEA website. And yeah, we just want to thank the whole team from Premise, but also you specifically, Mo and Sarah, for your time and effort to put this together. So thank you again, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.